I knew something had shifted the moment my daughter-in-law walked past me in my own kitchen without saying good morning. Not a glance, not a nod. She opened the refrigerator, took out the orange juice, my orange juice, the kind I buy from the farmer's market on Saturdays, poured herself a full glass and walked back upstairs. I stood there in my housecoat with the kettle in my hand, watching the door swing shut behind her. That was a Tuesday in late October. The maples outside my window had already gone to rust and gold. I remember because I stood there long enough to watch a single leaf come loose from the big one by the fence and drift down to the lawn. I thought, that's how it happens, isn't it? Not all at once, one leaf at a time. My name is Ruth. I'm 67 years old. I live in a 3-bedroom house in Barrie, Ontario, the same house where I raised my son and watched my husband Raymond lose his battle with cancer 11 years ago. After Raymond passed, I learned how to be alone in a way I hadn't expected to. Not lonely exactly, but quiet. I found rhythms that suited me. Tea at 6:30. The CBC on low while I made breakfast. Crosswords on Sunday mornings, still in my pajamas. Small things, but they were mine. My son. I'll call him by what I always called him growing up, because that's how I still think of him. His name is Joel. He's 41 now, broad-shouldered like his father, same way of going silent when he's uncomfortable. He met his wife Tara at a conference in Calgary about 6 years ago. She's sharp, I'll give her that. Puts things together quickly, knows what she wants. What she wanted, it turned out, was a lot of things I hadn't agreed to give. It started with the guest room. Joel called me in February of last year and said they were having some trouble with the condo they'd been renting in Toronto. The landlord was selling. They had 60 days. Could they stay with me just for a little while, until they found a new place? I said yes. Of course I said yes. He's my son. And 60 days, I thought. 2 months. I could manage 2 months. By June they were still there. I told myself it was the market. You've heard what the housing market in Ontario has been like. Anyone who's tried to rent or buy in the last few years knows that finding something decent and affordable isn't just hard, it's nearly impossible. I understood that. I made allowances for it. I kept making allowances, 1 month at a time, the way you do when you love someone and you don't want to be the one who makes things harder than they already are. But there's a difference between making allowances and being made invisible in your own home. I didn't see that line clearly enough, not at first. That's the truth of it. By August, Tara had rearranged the living room. She said the sofa placement was blocking the flow. She'd moved Raymond's reading chair, the big green one he'd had since before Joel was born, into the corner by the closet, half hidden behind a coat rack. I moved it back. She moved it again the following weekend while I was visiting my friend Gloria in Midland. I came home and stood in the doorway and stared at that corner for a long time before I said anything. When I mentioned it to Joel, he looked at me with that familiar quiet and said Tara was just trying to make the space feel more like home. I thought about that phrase for days afterward. More like home. Whose home exactly? I want to be honest here, because I think honesty is the only thing worth offering at my age. I was not a perfect presence in those months. I withdrew. I stopped initiating conversation at dinner. I moved around my own house carefully, like a guest who doesn't want to impose. I told myself I was being considerate. I think now I was being afraid. What I was afraid of mostly was the look on Joel's face when I brought anything up. That careful blankness, like he was managing me, like I was a situation to be handled, rather than his mother to be heard. Tara was not cruel in obvious ways. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't say anything outright that I could point to and say, there, that's the moment. It was more like being slowly edited out of a room you used to belong to. The grocery lists on the counter that didn't account for my daughter in needs. I have a mild shellfish allergy, and she knew it, but the shrimp pasta appeared on the table 3 times in 1 month. The weeknight dinners that started being called our dinners in texts between her and Joel that I occasionally glimpsed over his shoulder. The Thanksgiving planning, which I'll come to in a moment. In September, her mother began visiting on weekends. A pleasant enough woman, I have no quarrel with her. But the visits grew longer. By October, Tara's mother was staying Friday through Sunday, sleeping in the second guest room. There are only 2 bedrooms beyond mine, and the 2 of them would spend Saturday mornings in the kitchen together, talking and laughing in a way that felt deliberate in its exclusion of me. I would make my tea and sit at the kitchen table, and they would talk around me, not to me. I started taking my tea to the sunroom. The sunroom was Raymond's project. He built it himself over 2 summers in the early 90s, hauled the lumber in his pickup, swore at the instruction manuals, called his brother Gerald every other evening for advice. It's nothing fancy, 3 walls of windows, a concrete floor with a braided rug on top, 2 wicker chairs that have been repainted 4 times. But it faces east, and in the mornings the light comes in flat and golden and honest. I spent a lot of those autumn mornings in there, watching the yard, drinking my tea, trying to figure out what I was feeling and what, if anything, I was going to do about it. I want to tell you about the Thanksgiving dinner, because that's the moment everything became undeniable. Not just to me, but to the person who would eventually change the outcome of this story entirely. But I'll get to her. Canadian Thanksgiving falls in October, as you know, the 2nd Monday. I had been hosting Thanksgiving in my house since Raymond and I were first married, 43 years ago. It's not just a meal. It's the table his mother gave us when we moved into our first apartment in Sudbury, the china we picked out together, the cranberry sauce from a recipe his aunt wrote on an index card that's been laminated in my kitchen drawer since 1997. It matters to me in a way that might seem sentimental but is actually just what it is, the accumulation of a life. In early October, I began to plan. I bought a fresh tablecloth. I called my sister Helen's daughter, my niece Bev, to confirm she was coming up from Hamilton with her husband and their 2 teenagers. I ordered the turkey from the butcher on Dunlop Street, I've used for 15 years. I started the shortbread the week before because it needs time to rest in the fridge. What I didn't know, because no one told me, was that Tara had also been planning. I found out on the Friday before the holiday weekend. I came downstairs at 7 in the morning to find Tara on the phone in the kitchen, notepad open on the counter, going through what was clearly a catering order. Not an unusual sight, I suppose, except that when I asked her about it, she told me she'd arranged a full dinner for 14 people because she wanted Thanksgiving to be special this year. I asked who the 14 people were. Her parents, her brother and his girlfriend from Mississauga, 2 couples she and Joel knew from their Toronto life, her colleague and the colleague's husband, and Joel and Tara themselves. I said very carefully, "And what about my sister's family? They've already confirmed." She looked at me with something I can only describe as patient impatience, the expression of someone who has already decided the conversation is going to be difficult and is bracing for it, and said there simply wasn't room for everyone, and perhaps my family could come for a separate dinner another weekend. A separate dinner, in my house, at a table I've set every October for 43 years. I stood there and I felt something go very still inside me. Not anger exactly, something older and colder than anger. Recognition. That evening I set my own place at the dining room table and ate the leftover soup I'd made the day before. Joel was out. Tara and her mother ate in the kitchen, the catering brochures spread between them. I sat at my table, Raymond's table, his mother's table, and I ate my soup, and I thought very clearly about what I needed to do. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in the dark and listened to the house, and I thought about Raymond, and about the choices he would have told me to make. Raymond was not a confrontational man, but he had a core of something unbending in him, a kind of quiet insistence on what was right. I think I had let myself soften in the years since he died. I think grief does that sometimes. It makes you cautious in ways that aren't always healthy. By 5 in the morning, I had made my decisions. I got dressed. dark trousers, the good blue cardigan Joel gave me 2 birthdays ago. I made my tea, drank it standing at the kitchen counter, and then I sat down at the dining room table with a notepad and wrote 3 things down. The first was an appointment I needed to make. The second was a conversation I needed to have. The third was a call I needed to return. Because 2 days earlier I had received a voicemail from a woman I hadn't spoken to in several months, and I had been letting it sit the way you let things sit when you're not quite ready to face them. That third call was the one that mattered most. My granddaughter Lily is 18. She's Joel's daughter from his first marriage, his brief and painful marriage in his late 20s that lasted 3 years before they both admitted it wasn't working. Lily lives with her mother in Kingston, but she'd been spending a week with me every summer since she was 8. She knows my house the way a person knows a place they've chosen to love. She knows where I keep the good scissors and which step on the stairs creaks, and that Raymond's green chair is not to be moved under any circumstances. She had called me on a Wednesday evening when Tara and Joel were out at a friend's place. I'd missed the call and listened to the voicemail twice before saving it without calling back. In it she said, "Grandma, I just want to check on you. Something feels off when I talk to Dad. Are you okay?" 18 years old and sharper than half the adults in my life. I called her back that Friday morning at 6:15. She picked up on the second ring, which told me she'd been awake, maybe waiting. We talked for an hour and 20 minutes. I told her things I hadn't told anyone. Not Gloria, not my sister, not my doctor, who had noted at my last appointment that my blood pressure was elevated and asked if I was under any unusual stress. I told Lily about the chair and the juice and the Thanksgiving dinner and the catering brochures and the soup I had eaten alone at my own table. I told her about the way I had been moving through my own house like I was apologizing for being there. She was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then she said, "Grandma, you know you don't have to apologize for existing in your own home." I said I knew that. She said, "Do you, though?" That question stayed with me. It still does. The first thing I did that morning was call my family lawyer. His name is Gordon, and he's been handling my affairs since Raymond and I updated our wills after Joel was born. I left a message with his assistant asking for an appointment the following week. I told her it was regarding property matters and a review of my existing arrangements. The second thing I did was call Bev in Hamilton. I told her Thanksgiving was still on, that my house, my table, and my turkey were all accounted for, and that I would see her and her family on Monday as planned. The third thing I did was sit down with Joel when he came home that afternoon and have the conversation I had been avoiding for 8 months. I want to describe this carefully because I think it matters how it happened. I didn't raise my voice. I'm not a person who raises her voice. Raymond and I raised Joe in a household where things got talked through, sometimes inefficiently and painfully, but talked through. I sat across from my son at the kitchen table, and I told him what I had observed and what I had felt and what I had decided. I was specific. I used dates and examples. I told him about the chair. I told him about the Thanksgiving dinner and the catering order, and the conversation with Tara about my family coming for a separate dinner. He was quiet in the way he goes. Quiet. Then he said he hadn't known about the Thanksgiving plan, that he'd thought Tara was just adding some extra guests, not replacing mine. I looked at my son and I tried to see him clearly, not as the boy I raised, not as the man I wanted him to be, as the man he was in that moment, caught between his mother and his wife, and having chosen, not always consciously, to take the path of least resistance for 8 months. I told him I understood that marriage is complicated. I told him I wasn't asking him to choose sides. What I told him I was asking for was simple. This is my house. I own it. I pay the property taxes. My name is on the deed and has been for 31 years. I am not a guest here, and I will not be made to feel like one, not by anyone, not in this house or any other. He looked at the table for a long time. Then he looked up and said, "You're right, Mum." Just that. 2 words. But they were the right 2 words, and I could see the cost of them on his face. Not the cost of admitting I was right, but the cost of what it meant he would have to do next. Thanksgiving that year was complicated. Tara cancelled the catering order. There was a tension at the table that I won't pretend wasn't there. She was polite in a way that had edges to it, and her mother, who had planned to stay the weekend, left Saturday morning instead. My niece Bev carved the turkey because I asked her to, and she has always been good at it. Her teenagers loaded the dishwasher without being asked, and at some point in the evening my sister called from Vancouver Island to wish me well, and I stood in the sunroom in the dark with the phone pressed to my ear and felt, for the first time in months, like myself. Lily drove up from Kingston the following weekend. She brought me flowers from the market, yellow and rust-coloured, late-season ones that matched the maples, and we sat in the sunroom and drank tea, and I told her what had happened. She listened, with her feet tucked under her, that posture she's had since she was a little girl, and when I finished, she reached over and squeezed my hand. She said, "I'm proud of you, Grandma." I told her I wasn't sure proud was exactly the right word. She said, "Maybe not, but you stayed." I've thought about that a lot. You stayed. She didn't mean I stayed at my house, though that was part of it. She meant I stayed myself. I didn't dissolve into the situation the way I'd been doing, one small accommodation at a time. I didn't let resentment harden into bitterness either, which would have been just as much a way of losing myself. I stayed. Joel and Tara are still living in my house. The arrangement now has boundaries that are written down, not in the legal document, though Gordon helped me draft a formal letter about the terms of their residency that Joel signed without argument, written down in the more lasting way, spoken clearly, acknowledged and maintained. Tara does not rearrange furniture that belonged to Raymond. The orange juice from the farmer's market on Saturdays is mine, and if you would like some, she's welcome to ask. My family is welcome at my table on every occasion I choose to set it. These sound like small things, they are small things, that's rather the point. Gordon also helped me update my will. I won't go into the details because they're private and because I believe very strongly that an inheritance is not something owed. It's something given, and the giving is at the discretion of the person who earned it. I will say that the updated document reflects my values more accurately than the previous one did. A few weeks after Thanksgiving, I moved Raymond's chair back to its original place by the window, not as a statement, just because it belongs there, and because in the evenings when I sit in it with a book and the lamp on, I can see the yard, and sometimes I think I can feel the particular quality of the quiet that Raymond used to make in a room, a steady, warm presence. I miss him. I miss him in the way you miss someone who was so thoroughly part of your life that the shape of their absence becomes familiar, almost a companion in itself. But I am still here, and this is still my home. My sister told me recently on one of our Sunday calls that she thinks I handled everything with more grace than she would have. I told her I wasn't sure grace was the right word either. Mostly, I think I just finally got tired of being afraid. Fear is exhausting when you sustain it long enough. One day you wake up before dawn in your own house, and you drink your tea standing at your own counter, and something in you simply says, "Enough." And then you make your phone calls, and you have your conversation, and you go on living. That's all it was in the end. I went on living. In my own house, at my own table, in Raymond's green chair by the window, where I have always belonged, and where I intend to stay. There's a moment I keep coming back to, not the dinner, not the phone call, not even the conversation with Joel at the kitchen table. It's smaller than any of those. It's the morning I stood at the counter with my tea and watched Tara walk past me without a word, and I did nothing. I just watched. That moment stayed with me because it told me something honest about myself. Not about her, not about Joel. About me. I had been allowing things, quietly and consistently, that I should have named much earlier, not out of weakness exactly, but out of a kind of misguided kindness. I thought if I stayed soft, things would soften. They didn't, they hardened. That's usually how it goes when the wrong things go unaddressed. They don't dissolve, they settle in. What I had to reckon with eventually was that being good to the people you love doesn't mean being invisible to yourself. I'd confused the two for a long time. I thought generosity meant making yourself smaller. It doesn't. Real generosity requires you to be present, clear-eyed, honest about what you're giving and why. When I stopped being honest, when I started accommodating things I didn't actually agree to, I stopped being generous. I was just disappearing. Lily saw it before I did. She's 18 and she saw what I couldn't see from inside it. That tells me something about what it means to pay attention to the people around you. Really pay attention, not just to what they say, but to what they're not saying. She called because something felt off. She didn't have all the information. She just had her instincts and the courage to follow them. That kind of clarity, the willingness to see clearly and then act on what you see, rather than looking away because it's uncomfortable. I think that's one of the most valuable things a person can carry through their life. When I finally sat across from Joel and said what I'd been holding for 8 months, I was afraid. I want to be honest about that. I was afraid of his face going closed, afraid of making things worse, afraid of being the difficult one. But I'd reached a point where the fear of speaking was smaller than the cost of staying silent. That cost had been accumulating for a long time, without my fully acknowledging it. My blood pressure knew. My body knew before my mind caught up. What I learned, what this whole experience pressed into me, is that there's a kind of strength that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come in loudly. It comes in the form of getting dressed before dawn, making your tea, sitting down with a notepad, and writing out what needs to happen next. It comes in making the phone call you've been putting off. It comes in saying the true thing clearly, without cruelty, and then holding to it. Raymond's chair is back by the window. Lily's flowers are long gone, but I still think of them. Yellow and rust, late season, honest colors. And I'm still here, in my house, at my table, with my tea. That's enough. That has always been enough.